Egon Schiele, 5 paintings, 5 stories of obsession and tragedy. 1. Portrait of Valerie Neuzil, 1912. She was more than a muse, she was his scandal, his anchor, his undoing. Valerie Neuzil, known simply as Wally, entered Egon Schiele's life when he was only 21. She was a former model of Klimt, drawn into Schiele's magnetic, chaotic world. But in this portrait, her eyes do not belong to a woman in love. They belong to someone who already knows her devotion will cost her everything. Schiele painted her in 1912 in Nullenbach, during one of the darkest chapters of his young career. He and Wally had fled Vienna, tired of scandal, only to be accused by the conservative townspeople of indecency, corruption of minors, even pornography. When Schiele was briefly imprisoned, Valerie remained beside him, her loyalty unshaken. This painting becomes a testament to that loyalty, painted in a time when their love was both salvation and curse. The technique is sharp, raw, angular lines cutting through soft skin tones, the flat background pressing Valerie's figure into uneasy prominence. There's no softness, no romantic haze, only a brutally honest rendering of a woman bound to him by both passion and despair. Her tilted head, her gaze, both vulnerable and defiant, are not decorative. They are confrontations. Symbolically, the portrait mirrors Schiele's obsession with truth stripped of illusions. Wally is not an idealized muse. She is flesh and torment, a mirror of the turbulence around them. Some say the shadows on her face hint at her fate, abandoned by Schiele only a year later when he chose to marry into respectability, and dead by 1917, claimed by Spanish flu before turning 30. At the time, the painting was too intimate, too unsettling for the Viennese elite. Today, it is read as a haunting monument to one of art history's most tragic relationships. A love story painted not in roses but in thorns. And as you look at her eyes, you feel it, that haunting certainty. Valerie knew she would give her life to a man who could never truly belong to her. 2. Self-portrait with Chinese lantern fruits, 1912. The face that stares back from this canvas is not the self-assured gaze of a young master. It is skeletal, angular, almost cadaverous. Egon Schiele painted this self-portrait in 1912, the same year he painted Valerie, and it feels less like a declaration of identity than a prophecy of death. The bright orange Chinese lantern fruits surrounding his head burn like tiny flames against the stark emptiness of the background. Their vivid, almost unnatural glow contrasts with Schiele's own pallid, elongated face. Was he already imagining his mortality? Or was he painting the eternal conflict within him? Desire and decay, passion and death? The technique is fierce. The sharp strokes carve out his features like wounds. The exaggerated neck and hollow cheeks turn him into a figure between man and skeleton. This wasn't vanity, it was confession. Unlike Klimt's gilded masks of sensual beauty, Schiele tore himself open with his brush, unafraid to show the world the ugliness beneath. In Vienna, 1912 was a time of political tension, cultural brilliance and moral conservatism clashing violently. Freud was redefining the psyche, and Schiele seemed to paint directly from its darkest recesses. The Chinese lantern fruits, often symbols of transience and fertility, glow here like fragile emblems of life clinging to his skeletal presence. Critics at the time dismissed it as grotesque, even perverse. But to Schiele, it was truth, his life burning too fast, too brightly, destined to vanish before it matured. Today this self-portrait feels prophetic. Within 6 years Schiele would indeed be gone. Self-portrait with Chinese lantern fruits, 1912. The year is 1912. Vienna trembles with contradictions. Lavish cafes filled with intellectual debates, and shadows of political unrest growing in the background. And in the middle of this chaos stands Egon Schiele, only 22 years old, already infamous, already feared. When he paints self-portrait with Chinese lantern fruits, it is not simply a portrait. It is a declaration of war, against tradition, against morality, against death itself. The hook is immediate. Look at his face. The sharp cheekbones, the hollow eyes, the twisted body. He is staring at us, but not with vanity. His gaze is a challenge, a question that pierces the soul. Do you dare look at me as I am? Behind him float the strange, glowing shapes of Chinese lantern fruits, delicate orange-red husks that resemble both fire and fragile cages. They surround his head like a strange halo. Or is it a crown of thorns? Schiele painted this during a moment of both triumph and desperation. He had just been released from prison in 1912, after being accused of corrupting youth through his erotic drawings. For weeks, his name was smeared in newspapers, his works confiscated, some even burned. And yet he refused to hide. Instead he painted himself, defiant, gaunt, alive, but touched by scandal and near ruin. Imagine the studio, dim, cluttered, the air thick with the smell of oils and turpentine. Schiele stands before a mirror. His body, already thin from poverty, looks skeletal in the glass. He studies his own reflection with merciless honesty, sketching the contour of his hollow cheeks, the sharp bend of his neck, the haunted flicker in his eyes. Every brushstroke is an act of defiance, every line a refusal to conform to what Vienna expected of beauty. The artistic process here is raw. Schiele rejects the smoothness of academic painting. His brush moves like a blade, quick, cutting, precise. The background is stripped bare, flat, cold. Against this void, his face and the lantern fruits blaze with unnatural intensity. The oranges, reds, and yellows of the fruits burn like embers. His skin is pallid, almost corpse-like. The juxtaposition is brutal. Life and death, flame and ash, flesh and spirit. The symbolism is rich and unnerving. The Chinese lantern fruit, often called the winter cherry, hides a small berry inside its papery husk. To Schiele, this fragile shell represented the body, temporary, delicate, easily destroyed, while the seed inside symbolized the soul, trapped, yearning to break free. By placing these fruits around his own head, Schiele suggests that his soul, too, is caged, suffocating inside flesh and scandal. They glow like fire, yes, but also like the warning lights of mortality. The historical moment deepens the drama. Austria-Hungary in 1912 was a decaying empire. Artists, writers, and thinkers sensed collapse in the air. Freud probed the unconscious. Klimt painted golden dreams. Mahler's music thundered with existential dread. And Schiele? He stripped away illusions. While Klimt offered ornament, Schiele offered bone. He painted what society refused to look at, eroticism mixed with decay, beauty laced with death. When Self-Portrait with Chinese Lantern Fruits was first shown, the reactions were violent. Some critics called it obscene, others grotesque. They said his eyes looked possessed, his body sickly. But there were a few who understood. They saw in Schiele's self-portrait the truth of an entire generation. Young men haunted by desire, shame, and the looming specter of death. The painting became not just a portrait, but a prophecy of a century that would soon devour itself in war. Legacy has transformed the work. Today, it is one of Schiele's most famous self-portraits, displayed not as scandal but as genius. Historians see in it the raw psychology of modern art, the first unflinching confrontation with the body's fragility and the soul's torment. It influenced countless artists who came after, proving that beauty could exist even in what is uncomfortable, distorted, or terrifying. And yet, when we stand before it, the painting still unsettles. His gaze refuses to release us. The lantern fruits still glow, suspended like fragile hearts ready to collapse. It is not a comforting image. It is not meant to be. It is Schiele whispering across time. This is who I am. This is who we all are, temporary vessels, burning, caged, desperate for release. The note is haunting, almost prophetic. Within 6 years of painting this portrait, Egon Schiele would be dead at only 28, taken by the Spanish flu pandemic. But here in 1912 he already paints himself as if he knows, fragile, luminous, burning against the void. And so, Self-Portrait with Chinese Lantern Fruits remains not just a painting, but a warning, a confession, a mirror. When you look at it, you are not simply seeing Schiele. You are seeing yourself. Family, 1918. The year was 1918 and death was everywhere. The Spanish flu swept through Europe like a shadow, claiming millions of lives. War had shattered nations and Vienna was a city of hunger and grief. Egon Schiele, only 28 years old, painted family at the edge of his own mortality. He didn't know it yet, but this would be one of his last great works. A vision of life, creation, and love painted in the face of approaching death. The hook lies in the haunting irony. Schiele never had the family he depicted. His wife, Edith, was pregnant at the time. He dreamed of the child they would raise together, of the fragile peace after years of scandal, exile, and struggle. And yet, neither mother nor child would survive. Both would be taken by the flu within days of each other, followed by Egon himself. Family became not just a painting but a ghostly prophecy. Picture the scene. The studio is dim, autumn light barely reaching through narrow windows. Egon works feverishly as though time is slipping from his grasp. Edith sits as the model for the mother figure, her gaze heavy, her body tense with the weight of pregnancy. Schiele does not paint her as an idealized Madonna, glowing with maternal serenity. No, he paints her raw, vulnerable, a woman caught between life and death. At her side, the painter conjures a child, imagined but not yet born, placed between father and mother like a fragile bridge of hope. And looming close, Schiele paints himself, gaunt and spectral, his features sharp with exhaustion. The artistic process here is remarkable. Schiele employs angular lines and skeletal forms, his signature style pushing toward abstraction. Flesh is pale, almost drained of color, shaded in browns, ochres and gray-greens that evoke both earth and decay. The figures sit against a void-like background, as though suspended between worlds, the world of the living and the inevitable darkness beyond. Yet within this bleakness Schiele places a spark, the child glowing faintly like a fragile flame. The symbolism is undeniable. The father, mother and child are both real and unreal. They embody Schiele's longing for stability, for a home, for continuity. After years of scandal, imprisonment and poverty, he longed for acceptance and permanence. And yet, in the hollow eyes, the sharp hands, the skeletal frames, one feels the artist's awareness that time is cruel and fleeting. Family becomes both celebration and lament, an ode to what might have been. Historically, the painting stands at the end of an era. The First World War had just ended, leaving Vienna in collapse. Artists, writers and thinkers, once celebrated in the golden age of the secession, were dying, fleeing or falling into despair. Schiele himself, once branded as a criminal and outcast, had just begun to gain recognition. The State Gallery had purchased his works. Collectors were finally listening. For the first time he stood on the threshold of lasting fame. But destiny would not allow him to cross. The reception of family in its time was muted, overshadowed by death and chaos. Only later would critics see it as his final, unfinished masterpiece, a vision of life cut short, yet vibrating with emotional intensity. Today it is regarded as one of his most poignant works, a mirror of both personal and collective tragedy. Look closely at the figures. The mother sits half-turned away, her hands resting, her face lined with exhaustion. The child's body is thin, almost too fragile to exist. And the father, Schiele himself, stares outward, his gaze piercing, almost accusing. He confronts the viewer as though asking, "What will remain when I am gone?" The haunting truth followed swiftly. Edith, 6 months pregnant, died of influenza on October 28, 1918. Egon, devastated and ill, followed her 3 days later. The unborn child never drew breath. Family became not a portrait of the present, but a tombstone for a life unlived. And yet, in its silence, the painting resists despair. The figures, however gaunt, remain together. Their forms lock into one another, bound not by beauty but by necessity, by existence itself. In this, Schiele creates something eternal, a vision of family not as ideal but as fragile truth, love clinging to life even when life itself slips away. When you stand before family, you do not see a celebration or an idol. You see love under siege. You see hope trembling against the dark. And you hear the silent echo of Schiele's unspoken farewell. It is not merely a painting. It is a last prayer, that love, however brief, might outlast death. The Embrace, 1917. The year is 1917. Europe is drowning in the chaos of the First World War. Vienna, once a city of gilded salons and endless waltzes, has become a place of hunger, fear and whispered goodbyes. And in the middle of this darkness, Egon Schiele paints one of his most haunting, intimate works, The Embrace. At first glance, the canvas shows what the title suggests, two figures clinging to each other. But look closer and the embrace is not gentle. It is desperate, clawing, as if the two bodies are trying to merge into one, to escape the violence of the outside world by fusing together. Their limbs twist and fold in jagged lines, Schiele's unmistakable signature. There is no softness, no decorative background, only flesh, raw, angular, almost skeletal. This painting was born from tragedy and urgency. By 1917, Schiele had already seen death circle his life. His mentor Gustav Klimt had died the previous year, leaving a void in the Viennese art world and placing Schiele suddenly in the role of its most controversial leader. The war raged on, swallowing men his age, consuming the empire around him. Food was scarce, disease rampant, and Schiele himself felt the breath of mortality closer with each passing day. In this atmosphere, the embrace becomes not just a depiction of love, but of survival. The figures, many believe they represent Egon and his wife Edith, are naked, but not in the way Renaissance artists painted lovers. Their nudity is stripped of erotic idealism. The bodies are angular, flesh stretched over bone, veins visible. They cling together as though the world itself is dissolving and only this contact can hold them on the edge of existence. Their mouths do not kiss. Instead, their faces bury into each other's skin, as if inhaling the last traces of life left in the other. Schiele's technique here is brutal and precise. The background is nothingness, a void. The bodies are painted in sickly hues of ochre, green and gray, the colors of decay and exhaustion. And yet, the outlines, thick, restless, trembling, hold the figures with force, refusing to let them disappear. Unlike Klimt's golden embrace in The Kiss, Schiele's lovers are not eternal icons. They are mortal, fragile, caught in a fleeting moment between love and death. Symbolism bleeds through every line. The embrace is not comfort. It is resistance against solitude, against the inevitability of loss. In their tangled forms, we see the chaos of war, the desperation of a generation clinging to whatever scraps of tenderness could be found amidst destruction. The way their limbs intertwine, almost painfully, suggests not just passion but entrapment. The knowledge that love itself can be suffocating, yet still preferable to the abyss of being alone. Socially, Vienna in 1917 was collapsing. Hunger riots filled the streets, families mourned soldiers who would never return, influenza lurked unseen. In this environment, the painting became almost prophetic. Just 1 year later, Edith Schiele would die of the Spanish flu while 6 months pregnant. Egon himself would follow her into the grave only 3 days later, at the age of 28. The embrace, once a painting, became their final reality, the embrace of death itself taking both husband and wife within days. The reception of the embrace was mixed when first shown. Some called it grotesque, accusing Schiele of exposing love's ugliest side. Others saw in it something terrifyingly true, a mirror of their own desperation, their own need to hold on to someone while the world collapsed. Over time, art historians would come to recognize it as one of Schiele's masterpieces, not because it flatters but because it dares to show love not as fantasy, but as the last human refuge against despair. Look again at the painting. The bodies, twisted, skeletal, exhausted, seem almost to dissolve into one another. It is as if Schiele knew that soon he and Edith would no longer exist separately, but be bound forever in memory, in history, in tragedy. The embrace is not gentle. It is a fight, a plea, a prayer. And when you realize the date, 1917, you cannot unsee the shadow. Within a year both of them would be gone. What remains is this canvas, trembling with urgency, whispering the truth Schiele perhaps already sensed. That love is not eternal. But in the face of death, it is the only thing that feels alive. The artist's sister, Melanie, 1907. It is 1907. Egon Schiele is just 17 years old. Still a student, still restless, still trying to break away from the suffocating rules of the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. Yet even then his hand trembles with urgency, his vision already different, already defiant. And so he turns his gaze on someone close, someone who cannot refuse him, his younger sister, Melanie. The painting, the artist's sister, Melanie, might at first appear gentle. She sits, dressed, a girl on the cusp of womanhood. But when you look closer you see what would later define Schiele's art. The raw intensity of the human soul, the way he strips away comfort to reveal something unsettling beneath the surface. Melanie is not smiling. She does not pose like a society portrait. Instead, her expression is distant, her body tense, her eyes burning with something between discomfort and intimacy. Why did Egon paint her? The answer lies in his own obsessions. Schiele, even as a teenager, was fascinated and tormented by the fragile boundary between innocence and desire, between familial love and something forbidden. With few models available to him, he turned to those nearest, his sisters. Melanie became both muse and mirror, a figure he studied with intensity that unsettled even those closest to him. The process of this painting was charged with conflict. Egon, impatient with the Academy's rigid training, wanted to capture not ideal beauty but truth. He worked quickly, nervously, sketching outlines that trembled with energy. The contours of Melanie's body are sharp, angular, refusing to settle into classical softness. He exaggerates her features, elongates her form, almost distorting her, as if trying to reach beneath the surface into something unspoken. The colors are muted, earthy shades of brown, gray and faded green, already far from the bright palettes of the Impressionists who had dazzled Europe only decades before. Egon wanted no illusion, no decoration. What he wanted was confrontation, the truth of a young woman sitting before him, vulnerable under his gaze. And though the canvas shows clothing, the psychological nakedness is far more striking. But this work cannot be seen in isolation. Vienna in 1907 was a city of masks, a place where high society hid behind etiquette while beneath it pulsed desire, decadence, and repression. Egon had grown up watching hypocrisy tear through families, priests preaching morality while scandals whispered in shadows. In painting Melanie, he was not simply painting his sister. He was painting the tension of an entire society, the unease of adolescence, the collision between purity and temptation. Symbolism seeps into the portrait. Melanie's stiff posture suggests resistance, but her face, caught between childlike softness and adult awareness, tells another story. Some critics later argued that Schiele was projecting his own turmoil onto her, that the painting is less about Melanie herself than about Egon's obsessive struggle with boundaries, with desire, with guilt. She becomes, in this sense, not just his sister, but the embodiment of his inner conflicts. The reception of these early works, including the artist's sister, Melanie, was troubling even then. Teachers at the academy complained of Schiele's distortions, his refusal to respect classical proportion. Family members grew uneasy at his fixation on his sisters as models. But for Schiele there was no turning back. This painting was a declaration that art for him would not be polite, would not be pretty, would not obey. It would disturb. It would expose. It would cut open the surface and demand that viewers look at what they preferred to avoid. Looking at this painting now, knowing the darkness that would later follow him, the scandals, the arrests, the accusations of indecency, you see the beginning of everything. The uncomfortable intimacy. The sharp lines that wound as much as they describe. The refusal to flatter. In Melanie's stiff figure, you can already sense the ghosts of the later works. The twisted nudes, the skeletal lovers, the haunted self-portraits. And perhaps that is why this early portrait remains so haunting. Because it is not just a painting of a sister. It is a confession of a young man who already knew he would never fit into the world as it was. It is the moment where Egon Schiele began to break free of tradition, and in doing so, placed even those closest to him into the storm of his vision. When you look at Melanie's eyes in this painting, you see more than a young girl. You see Egon himself reflected, a restless boy who would grow into an artist obsessed with desire, mortality, and truth. It is as though he painted not only his sister but also his fate. And that fate, as we know, would be as brief as it was brilliant.